Hello there, my... And the tall windows held small lakes of moonlight upon their panes. Harry came back later than he'd meant to, his scarf unspooling a little at his neck, his thoughts still wandering the corridors he'd paced with Ron after supper. They'd talked about Quidditch formations and whether the greenhouses would be warm enough for herbology tomorrow, and somewhere between staircases, Harry had decided that tonight would be a good night to write again. Not for homework, though there was a Transfiguration essay sulking in his bag, but for the quiet contentment of watching words become visible in the candle's glow. The small table in the corner waited for him like an old friend. He set down his satchel. It gave a cooperative thump. The ancient inkpot, squat and unremarkable, except for its delicate runes, rested where he'd left it that morning, catching the firelight the way frost catches dawn. The runes looked almost drowsy, gold softened to honey in the dimness. Ron had promised to come by after borrowing a chess set, but he'd been waylaid by Seamus and Dean and a conversation about exploding snap that involved, unavoidably, the word exploding. Hermione, after a brief and efficient shepherding of 2 first years who had lost an entire foot of parchment to a misplaced self-editing quill, had gone to fetch a book from the library and said she'd be back in precisely 15 minutes. Harry smiled to himself. 15 minutes, when Hermione promised them, felt like a spell. He trimmed the candle wick and coaxed a delicate, steady flame back to life. Quill, parchment, a scatter of motes for the Transfiguration essay he wasn't writing, and the small old inkpot that made his fingers curiously eager, everything in its place. The castle exhaled around him. The embers breathed. Somewhere above, the clock hummed its slow, kindly count. He dipped the quill. The ink clung to the nib with unusual obedience, like a cat agreeing to sit exactly where you wanted it to. He let the tip hover over the parchment as though listening, then began. Draft charm. Murmuration for tidy stacks of parchment. Gentle radius, no gusts, intent. Calm, not force. A tidy is a kindness, not a scold. He smiled. It wasn't exactly a spell, not formally. It was an idea with manners, the way Hermione would prefer magic to be. He wrote a second line, more thoughtful. Latin root, sileo for hush, or lenis for soft, or ordino for arrange. The letters came smoothly, like strokes he'd practiced 100 times. Then he noticed something different, a lingering shine along the strokes that didn't vanish as quickly as ink should. The letters were polished at the edges, a little like moonlight skimming water. He leaned closer. The strokes did not smear. They set instantly, as if they had been waiting to be written. Harry wrote another line, this one half a joke. If magic listened better to the word please, Hermione would put it in the curriculum. He sat back, pleased with the shape of the thought. Then, as he turned his head to glance at the fire, the edge of the parchment caught a draft, only a whisper of air, and the topmost corner folded down of its own accord, as neatly as any schoolbook dog-ear. Harry reached to smooth it. Before his fingers touched the page, the folded corner lifted again, slowly, like the lid of a music box. The parchment flattened itself with care, and the line he'd just written gleamed, its final letter brightening and then dimming as though it had breathed. Harry didn't move. He wasn't frightened. Curiosity had arrived first and took the chair opposite with a friendly nod. He looked at the inkpot. The surface of the ink was absolutely motionless. No ripple, no wind, only the small, fathomless pool of black, reflecting the candle's patient flame. "Right," he murmured into the gentle hush. That was new. The fire answered by settling more deeply into its own warmth. Harry dipped the quill again, not because he needed more ink, but because the act felt like the proper way to knock politely. "Old Inkpot," he wrote, because speaking to things at Hogwarts had never gone entirely amiss. "I'm Harry. If you are enchanted, you're being very polite about it." He paused, smiling at the ridiculousness of the sentence and the way it made perfect sense here. He waited. The parchment lay calm beneath his hand. The candle tip elongated the smallest bit, then resumed its usual shape. The portraits above the mantel turned in their sleep and did not wake. Then the ink he had just laid down, his own handwriting, thinned ever so slightly, as if a tide beneath the page had shifted. The horizontal bar of the H trembled, and the tail of the Y in Harry curled a touch further, like a cat stretching. A single dot, one he hadn't placed, appeared beside the final full stop, a tiny ink-black star. His chest lifted with a soft, incredulous breath. "Hello?" he whispered. The dot moved, not far, not fast. It drifted like a speck of dust through a ray of winter sunlight and came to rest beneath the words "Old Inkpot." With an unhurried care, ink blossomed from the dot into a faint, fine script, smaller than his own, the letters slender and a little old-fashioned. Harry watched them form, not drawn by an invisible quill, but condensing from the existing blackness, as dew forms from air that has become exactly right for dew. "Polite is a kind spell," the new line wrote. "Hello, Harry." Heat rose to his cheeks. It wasn't fear, it was the sudden, childlike thrill of an answer where no answer was expected. He glanced over his shoulder automatically, as if Hermione might already be there, hands on her hips, eyebrows raised so high they'd keep her fringe company. But the stair to the dormitories remained quiet, and the portrait hole was merely a circle of mild red shadow. "Hello," Harry whispered back aloud, and also wrote, because the ink had chosen that method, and it felt right to honor it. "Hello. Who are you?" There was no immediate movement. Candlelight stitched itself along the rim of the inkpot's glass. The runes breathed their faint gold. Then, in that same neat, old-fashioned hand, I remember hands. I remember words leaned upon me like elbows. I remember being filled again and again. I am not a who, but not a what either. I am a made thing that learned to listen. Harry read the line twice, the corners of his mouth lifting with a tenderness he hadn't expected to feel toward an object. He thought of the sorting hat and the gentle way it spoke inside your head, of the way the castle sometimes seemed to offer staircases like a good host offers a chair. He wrote, "Do you belong to someone? Should I bring you back?" The ink answered, slowly, carefully, as though choosing the gentlest stone to step on in a stream. "I belonged to anyone who asked kindly. I sat on a desk that watched many winters. I liked the sound of quills. I liked the pauses. I belonged to the pause most of all. Harry chuckled under his breath, and the sound felt correct in the room, subdued, friendly. I like pauses too, he said, and wrote it as well. Then, because the thought had been waiting behind others. May I ask your help? I'm trying to imagine a small spell, a tidy one, nothing loud. Across the room, the portrait of a hill with a hyacinth blue sky shifted its clouds by a finger's width. Otherwise, the world held very still to hear the answer. It came, thread thin and unhurried. Small spells are best learned by small moves. You write the wish. I remember the shape that wishes, like that often take. Harry hesitated. He could feel the outline of the idea as a warm weight in his hands, the way a charm sometimes waited, patient, until the words and the intention met in a shared room. He chose another piece of parchment and smoothed it with his fingertips, the way Mrs. Weasley smoothed a collar before a photograph. Spell intention: to gather messy parchment into even stacks, to leave quills resting safely, to let a page, once folded, remember flatness. To tidy is to care, not to control. He paused. The ink shone and settled without smudging. He glanced toward the stairs, half expecting Hermione to make a surprised and pleased sound at the phrasing. She would laugh at him for making tidiness into poetry and then copy the words into her notes. He wrote name and then several possibilities, Latin roots, snippets he had learned in charms, a tiny drawing of a circle with a dot inside it because it looked tidy and made him inexplicably happy. The reply came like the softest nod, Leniordo. Then, after a breath, whisper it. Do not push. Let your wand listen to your breath more than your mouth. Harry studied the word. Linear, gentler. Do, I give. The name felt like warm water and smooth stone. He could feel where it might fit into the castle spaces without scratching them. He took up his wand, not raising it yet, and merely let it rest against the line of ink that spelled the word. It tingled, as if the word were a thread, and his wand a needle that recognized its work. Harry? He jumped, not much, just enough to remember that he was a boy in a warm room with friends, not a character in a book read by ink. Hermione's voice carried its usual light precision, but also that particular softness she kept for very late hours. She stood just inside the portrait hole, hair newly wind-ruffled from the corridor, cheeks a little pink. Ron followed her with the chessboard, the pieces muttering complaints about being organized and advising him, loudly, to leave the pawns behind because they were always underfoot. Harry glanced at the parchment. The elegant little script had faded by a shade, blending itself into the lines of his own writing. The ink in the bottle looked as any ink might, calm, opaque, unassuming. He felt an impulse to hide the page, not because he wanted to keep a secret from them, but because the moment felt fragile and newly hatched, like something that needed cupped hands for a short while longer. Still at it? Hermione asked, smiling as she reached him, eyes flicking to the runes on the glass. She set a thick book on the table, The Ethics of Everyday Enchantments, and slid into the chair opposite. Ron thumped into a seat and began lining up the chess pieces with a tenderness they pretended not to notice. "I'm thinking," Harry said truthfully, "about small spells, the sort that make a room feel cared for." Hermione's face softened as if someone had opened a window in it. "The best kind," she said. "Magic should know when to be quiet." She reached for his parchment with a questioning eyebrow. He nodded, and she read, eyes moving slowly, a small smile reviving and settling. "Intent before incantation," she murmured. "You're learning." Ron leaned over, squinting. "What does that one say?" Len your do. Leniordo, Hermione corrected gently. "From linear, gentler. It's rather beautiful, actually." She looked up at Harry. "Try it." Harry looked at the table, the sprawl of notes, the chessboard, Hermione's book, the quill perched precariously at the edge of the inkpot. He felt a momentary temptation to perform, to wand whoosh and flourish. Then he remembered the small script's counsel, "Whisper it, do not push." He let out a long, quiet breath. "All right," he said, mostly to the room, and more softly to the old ink. "Are you with me?" He didn't write it, he only thought it, and the candle flame steadied so gently that it felt like a yes. He placed the tip of his wand against the table's surface, not tapping, not pointing, simply touching, as if to greet it. "Leniordo," he whispered. The change was almost nothing, so mild that Ron blinked and said, "Did it?" and then stopped, because it had. In one slow, unhurried inhalation, the papers on the table slid into neat stacks, the unfinished essay to one side, the spell notes aligned, blank parchment gathered with the care of a librarian's hand. Hermione's book settled square to the table's edge. The chessboard eased an inch to the right to make room, murmuring, "Much better," in a satisfied bass. The quill turned and lay down across the inkpot's lip, as if it had remembered that this was exactly where it liked to rest. Nothing snapped, nothing shone. The room simply felt tidier in the way a person's thoughts feel tidier after a good sentence. Ron grinned, slow and impressed. "Blimey," he said in a whisper that did not wish to wake the magic. That's decent." Hermione had gone still with a kind of joy Harry had only ever seen when a theory turned into something you could hold. "You whispered it," she said, the words themselves a whisper. "Of course you did." She looked at the runes on the inkpot, attentive but not grasping. "Where did you find that again?" "McGonagall's desk," Harry said. He turned the bottle carefully so the runes faced Hermione. They gleamed for a heartbeat, as if they were peeking back at her. "Do you think—" "I think," Hermione said, smiling, "that sometimes a tool becomes a companion if it has been near enough careful hands." She touched the glass with the very tips of her fingers and then drew them back, respectful. "It's old." Pre-standard script around the base, blessings for clarity, humility, and, oh. Her smile deepened. "Patience." Ron snorted. "Never heard of an impatient inkpot." "You have," Hermione said, tilting her head toward Seamus's quill jar on the far table. A muffled pop from within punctuated her point. "You just didn't call it by its proper name." They laughed softly, and the common room seemed to lean closer, pleased. Outside the tower windows, snow revised its own footing on the stone, flakes drifting slower, like feathers thinking. Harry put his hand on the parchment again, seeking only to feel the cool tooth of it beneath his palm. A single, tiny dot of ink at the bottom margin, no bigger than a freckle, brightened and dimmed like a blink. He wrote, without drawing attention to it, "Thank you." A dot appeared beside his. "Welcome. Such a good word." "Try it on the shelf," Ron suggested, with the eager caution of someone who has finally met a spell that won't singe his eyebrows. He gestured to the low bookcase against the wall, where textbooks leaned in a tipsy confederation. "But don't make it bossy. My chocolate frog cards live there, and they're terrible at being told what to do." Hermione hid a smile behind her knuckles. "A gentle radius," she said. "Remember what you wrote?" Harry stood, the wand still a weight more like a pencil than a sword in his hand. He approached the shelf the way one approaches a napping cat, confident but unwilling to surprise. He extended his wand toward the muddle of spines, felt for the shape of the room's breath, and exhaled into it. Leniordo. A hush pressed into the space, as if someone had set a fingertip against a bell to keep it from ringing. Books nudged each other companionably into order. A stubborn herbology text sat up straighter with the air of someone being offered a chair rather than an instruction. The stack of chocolate frog cards shuffled themselves into a tidy little tower, 3 of the faces winking in unison before deciding that was quite enough performance for one evening. Ron clapped once, very quietly. "I take back what I said about tidy spells being boring." Hermione's eyes shone. "It's considerate," she said, looking from the shelf to the inkpot to Harry. "That's the word. The magic is considerate because the intention is." Harry looked at the old bottle, and for a moment he could almost imagine that the ink inside held not only pigment, but listening, a dark reflecting pool that did not simply show your face, but noticed the expression you wore. "Small moves," the thin script had said. He felt the truth of it in his shoulders, which relaxed in a way no triumph ever gave him. This wasn't victory, it was fit. The world was slightly more in order, and the order had arrived without a single sharp corner. They talked a while longer, the way people talk when the big thing has happened, and now the small, good talk can begin. About uses for the charm, Hermione suggested the library carols. Ron proposed the inside of his trunk, which had learned chaos from the Weasley twins. About names for the variations, Leniordo Pluma for quills, Leniordo Tabula for desks. About whether Filch would consider this a menace or a miracle. Time put on its soft slippers. The chess pieces dozed against their ranks. The portraits above the mantel dreamed back into their landscapes, and a fox in one small painting turned twice and slept with its nose against its brush-painted tail. When at last Ron pushed back his chair and declared that if he didn't go to bed, he would wake up in potions and call Professor Snape Mom, they gathered their things. Hermione closed her book with a kiss of sound, eyes lingering once more on the inkpot. "We should tell McGonagall," she said gently, "not to give it back, just to say we're being careful with something old and kind." Harry nodded. "Tomorrow." Ron leaned over the table, squinting at the parchment as if it might reveal a chest opening. "Night, you lot," he told it, and then laughed at himself, and then didn't take it back. They climbed the stairs, their footsteps domesticated by thick carpets. The room exhaled. Alone again, the old inkpot sat in its circle of lamplight, the runes soft as breath. The last flare of the candle made a filament-fine brightness across the rim. On the parchment, beside "Thank you," a final dot appeared, hardly visible. "Good night." The hearth answered with the smallest sigh of settling ash. The tower kept its watch. Outside, the snow agreed to keep the world quiet just a little longer. And somewhere inside the deep and attentive ink, a memory of many hands and many pauses folded itself into Harry's new word. A gentle spell, written in kindness, made truer by a bottle that had learned over centuries how to write back. The next few days passed quietly, though something faintly enchanted lingered in the air around Harry's desk. The inkpot sat there like a sleeping creature, silent, still, yet undeniably present. Whenever Harry wrote near it, he felt a strange ease, as though his thoughts arranged themselves before touching parchment. Even Hermione noticed the change. "Your handwriting looks calmer," she remarked one morning, glancing at his notes during breakfast. "You usually press too hard when you're thinking." Harry smiled, stirring his tea. "Maybe I've learned patience from your study habits." Ron snorted into his pumpkin juice. "Or maybe the ink's doing the work for you." Harry laughed it off, but later, sitting alone in the common room again, he wondered if Ron was closer to the truth than he realized. That evening, when the castle's torches dimmed and the air hummed softly with sleep, Harry opened his journal once more. The common room was nearly empty. Only the low crackle of the fire, the gentle snores of a portrait dozing above the mantel, and the rhythmic flick of Crookshanks's tail as he slept near the hearth. Harry uncorked the inkpot. The surface rippled faintly, though no breath of wind stirred it. It shimmered like starlight spilled into liquid form. He leaned closer and whispered, almost without meaning to, "Still awake, are you?" The ink didn't move, not at first. But then, very faintly, a small spiral of darkness formed in the center of the liquid, expanding outward until it reached the rim of the glass. It didn't spill, it just pulsed once, like a heartbeat. Harry dipped his quill. The moment the nib touched the surface, he felt a cool tingling travel up his fingers, not unpleasant, just startlingly aware. He drew in a slow breath and began to write. "Dear Inkpot," he began, smiling at the absurdity. "I suppose you've been alive longer than I've been around. Do you remember who first used you?" He paused, watching the black lines so sometimes settle into the parchment. The letters shimmered faintly, as they always did before drying. Then, very slowly, a new line began to appear beneath his own. The letters didn't form from a quill. They rose gently out of the ink already on the page, as though answering from beneath the surface of his words. "I remember many hands," it wrote in the same soft script as before. But the first one was lonely. Harry blinked, his heart warm with curiosity. "Lonely," he wrote, "at Hogwarts? That seems impossible. Lonely in company. came the reply. Many voices, none listening. The ink remembers what ears forget. He smiled at that. There was something comforting about the way the words came, not haunting, but wistful, like an old song. What did they write about? He asked. The ink hesitated, then wrote, Dreams that should not be spells. Harry frowned thoughtfully. Dreams that should not be spells? What does that mean? It means magic born from hearts too tired to rest, the ink answered. They wanted to write peace into the world, but peace cannot be conjured, only practiced. Harry let the meaning sink in. He traced one finger along the rim of the inkpot, his thoughts quiet. You sound like Dumbledore, he murmured softly. Dumbledore listened to me once, the ink wrote, but he did not ask questions. Only wrote truths he already knew. Harry stared at the glowing words, a faint thrill running through him. The ink had known Dumbledore. That thought alone made the night feel both vast and strangely tender. He hesitated, then asked, Do you remember what he wrote? The response came slower this time, as though the ink was searching through long-forgotten depths. He wrote that words can heal if written gently enough, that every spell should begin as kindness. Harry's breath caught, not from fear, but from something like recognition. The words felt true in a way that reached beyond magic itself, like the gentle hum of the castle when it slept. He smiled softly and wrote, I think I understand that. The ink shimmered. Then you will write well, Harry Potter. Before he could reply, something unexpected happened. The inkpot trembled, so subtly that at first he thought he'd imagined it. The light in the room dimmed for a moment, as though the candlelight had leaned closer to listen. Then, a single droplet of ink rose from the bottle, floating in the air like a bead of midnight. It hovered just above the parchment, then slowly descended. When it touched the paper, it didn't blot. It spread into delicate, swirling shapes, forming a small circular symbol. Inside the circle, runes pulsed faintly, matching those on the inkpot's glass rim. Harry leaned closer. The runes were the same, but older, slightly altered, as though they'd evolved over centuries. He reached out carefully, but before his finger could touch it, the symbol shimmered and melted into the parchment, leaving only a faint silvery mark behind. He sat back, stunned and quietly exhilarated. The inkpot was alive, yes, but more than that, it seemed to be remembering itself. When Hermione returned a few minutes later, Harry was still staring at the parchment. Harry, she said gently, you look as if you've seen a ghost. Ink, he said absently. I've seen ink. She raised an eyebrow, walking closer. Ink? Harry turned the parchment toward her. Look, it moved. Hermione frowned, adjusting her glasses as she studied the faint silvery ring. That's ancient symbology, she whispered. I've seen something like this in magical implements of the Founders. It's a listening seal. They were used to preserve consciousness in enchanted objects. Harry nodded slowly. So it's alive. Hermione glanced up at him, eyes wide. Alive is a strong word, but aware, yes, that's possible. Maybe it's storing thoughts or memories from those who've used it before. Her gaze softened. Harry, That's incredible, but it's also fragile magic. You have to be gentle with it. Harry smiled faintly. I think that's the point. They sat together for a while in quiet awe, the fire humming softly beside them. Then, as Hermione gathered her books, she paused, her eyes catching on a new glimmer from the inkpot. Did it always glow like that? Harry turned. The ink was shimmering faintly again, but this time it wasn't gold. It was silver blue, like moonlight reflected in still water. A faint whisper filled the room. It wasn't loud, not even distinct at first, just the soft sound of words not yet fully formed. The air felt colder, but not unpleasant. Hermione froze. Harry, did you? Yeah, he whispered. I heard it. The whisper grew just a little stronger, forming a shape. Not quite voice, not quite song. It sounded like ink sliding across parchment, and in that rhythm, words began to form within Harry's mind. The ink remembers you now. The hand that writes with kindness wakes old magic. Harry's pulse quickened. The voice, if it could be called that, was calm, ancient, and gentle, like someone speaking through a dream. Hermione pressed her hand to her mouth. It's communicating without writing. The candlelight flickered, as if nodding in agreement. Harry whispered aloud, What are you? The ink shimmered. I am not what was made, but what was left behind. The air trembled softly around them, but the tone of the room remained calm. There was no sense of threat, only deep curiosity, a hum of shared awareness. Hermione swallowed. It's self-sustaining consciousness, she murmured, like an echo given form. The ink pulsed for once. Echoes listen when the world forgets. Harry met Hermione's eyes. It's been waiting, hasn't it? For someone to write with it again. The silver light deepened, spreading across the parchment in delicate waves, illuminating faint traces of words that weren't Harry's or the ink's. Names, fragments, signatures long lost to time, all flickering softly before fading again. Hermione watched, awestruck. It's showing us everyone who's ever written with it. One signature glowed longer than the rest, elegant, curling, and unmistakably old-fashioned. Rowena Ravenclaw, Hermione breathed. The ink pulsed, brighter this time. She taught me to listen, not to command. The two friends sat in complete silence, overwhelmed not by fear, but by wonder. Harry, Hermione whispered finally, her eyes wide and full of gentle awe. You're writing with a relic of the Founders. Harry's gaze softened as he looked down at the glowing inkpot, his reflection shimmering in its depths. The runes along its rim glowed steady and calm now, as if the object itself were content to be seen again after centuries of quiet waiting. He smiled faintly. Then maybe it's time someone listened back. And with that, he dipped his quill once more. The ink flowed easily, warm, alive, and utterly still. And when his quill touched parchment again, the words came like music, slow, careful, full of light. Old magic listens to kind hands. As the final line dried, the inkpot glowed one last time before settling into a steady, peaceful rhythm. The whisper faded, replaced by the soft sigh of the fire and the heartbeat hush of the sleeping castle. The ink had remembered, and so had Hogwarts. The following days unfolded like softly turned pages, quiet, careful, and threaded with curiosity. Harry carried on with his lessons as usual, yet every time he glanced at his bag, where the enchanted inkpot rested wrapped in cloth, he could feel its quiet awareness, as though it was listening to the world through the layers of fabric. There was no menace in that feeling, only a strange companionship, like sharing a secret with something ancient and kind. At breakfast in the great hall, the usual chatter swirled around them, clinking spoons, owls swooping in with letters, and Ron complaining about porridge again. But Harry was distant, his thoughts looping around what had happened in the common room. Hermione noticed immediately. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" she asked gently, sipping her pumpkin juice. Harry nodded, lowering his voice. "I can't stop wondering. If it really belonged to Rowena Ravenclaw, then that means this ink has been part of Hogwarts since the beginning. Imagine everything it's seen, every spell, every thought written in its ink." Hermione's eyes softened. "That's exactly why we have to be careful with it. It might still be connected to old castle magic. Some of the founder's enchantments were unpredictable." Ron, who was buttering toast with exaggerated focus, looked up. "Right. So you're saying the ink could what? Start writing the Sorting Hat's diary next?" Harry chuckled, shaking his head. "It's not dangerous. It feels peaceful, like it's just glad to be heard again." Hermione set down her cup. "Then maybe that's the mystery, Harry. Maybe it isn't just enchanted. It's awake because someone finally approached it with kindness, not power." Those words lingered long after breakfast. That evening, after the castle settled into its nocturnal hush, Harry returned to the common room. The firelight danced lazily across the walls, throwing moving shadows over the armchairs and bookshelves. He took out the inkpot, setting it gently on the table. The runes along its rim shimmered faintly, as if greeting him. He smiled softly. "Hello again." The ink rippled once, and though it didn't write back this time, Harry sensed its acknowledgement, a warmth that wasn't heat, but presence. He unrolled a fresh piece of parchment. His thoughts had been turning all day toward a quiet idea. If the ink remembered its past writers, perhaps it also remembered their emotions, their states of mind, even their dreams. If he wrote not a spell, but something heartfelt, something honest, maybe it would respond differently. He dipped the quill and began slowly. "Sometimes I wonder what magic really is," he wrote. "Not just the wands and spells, but the feeling that connects everything. Maybe it's a kind of conversation. The world listens when you speak gently enough." As the last line dried, a faint shimmer rose from the ink, weaving upward like smoke. The air cooled, and the fire dipped lower. On the parchment, new words began to form beneath his handwriting, this time not written in his familiar style, but in the flowing, graceful hand that had appeared before. "Magic is a reply, not a command." The phrase appeared, lingered, and then, softly, continued. "You understand it as we once did. Those who built these halls do not chase the spell, let it come when it wishes to be known." Harry's quill slipped from his fingers, landing softly on the table, his chest filled with quiet awe. He whispered, "You mean the founders used to think this way?" The ink shimmered again, almost like a nod. "We built Hogwarts not to teach control, but care." That lesson was forgotten when ambition grew loud. The words sank into the page, like rain soaking into earth, leaving faint silver traces where they'd been. The candle beside him flared for an instant, and then dimmed again. The moment passed with the quiet finality of a sigh. Hermione appeared moments later, her footsteps soft against the carpet. She stopped short when she saw Harry sitting motionless before the parchment. "Harry? Are you all right?" He turned to her slowly, a faint smile ghosting across his face. It spoke again. She hurried closer, her eyes scanning the parchment. Though most of the writing had faded, the faint outline of the last sentence remained visible. She touched the edge of the page, as if afraid it might dissolve under her fingertips. "Magic is a reply, not a command," she whispered. "That's beautiful. Philosophical, even. Rowena Ravenclaw was known for that kind of wisdom." Ron joined them a minute later, yawning. "What's all this?" "Thought you two were studying, not summoning ghosts." Hermione gave him a look, but handed him the parchment anyway. "Read this." Ron squinted at it, brow furrowing. "That's not your handwriting, Harry." "Wait, are you saying the ink's teaching you?" "Maybe," Harry said softly. "It's not like a ghost, though. It doesn't feel alive in that way. It feels reflective, like it's holding the memory of something older." Hermione sat back, thinking. If that's true, then the ink could be linked to the very foundation spells that hold Hogwarts together. The castle itself is alive. It adapts, remembers, and reacts. Maybe this ink is part of that same consciousness. Ron blinked. "So you're saying the castle's writing letters now?" Hermione exhaled patiently. "Not quite. But the magic of Hogwarts is woven through objects all over the school. Portraits, staircases, even the ghosts. Why not an inkpot?" A silence followed, soft, thoughtful, and strangely comforting. The fire crackled, filling the room with a rhythmic warmth. The portrait of an elderly witch above them stirred slightly in her sleep and murmured, "Hush, children." "The castle dreams too." The three friends exchanged quiet looks. After a while, Hermione gathered her things to head to bed, and Ron followed, still muttering something about talking furniture. But Harry stayed behind. The night had deepened into that peculiar stillness Hogwarts knew so well, the kind that wasn't truly silence, but rather a gentle listening. He touched the inkpot again. Its glow had dimmed, but when his fingers brushed the rim, it pulsed once, faint and reassuring. He wrote one more line before extinguishing the candle. "Do you dream too?" The ink shimmered softly. "When the castle sleeps, we remember." Harry smiled in the darkness. "Then good night." "Good night, kind hand," the ink replied, before settling back into perfect stillness. The next morning dawned in a pale wash of gold and mist. Harry awoke to the usual morning bustle, the sound of feet on the stairs, the smell of toast from the great hall, but something in the air felt different. It was subtle, but even as he dressed, he sensed it. The castle was humming again, not loudly, not menacingly, but softly, almost like a song beneath the floorboards. When he met Hermione and Ron for breakfast, she noticed it too. "Do you hear that?" she whispered as they crossed the corridor. "It's like the walls are humming." Ron frowned. Great. First singing ghosts, now musical bricks. But Harry didn't laugh. The hum wasn't random. It had a rhythm, a pattern, and when they reached the Great Hall, he realized the light filtering through the enchanted ceiling seemed to move with it. It was as though the castle itself was alive in a new way, calmer, clearer. Portraits along the walls appeared more vibrant, the very air sharper and fresher. Even Professor McGonagall paused mid-stride, her gaze flicking upward in faint curiosity. "Strange," she murmured, half to herself. "I haven't heard that sound since." She trailed off, her expression softening with something that looked like memory. "Never mind. It's a pleasant morning, isn't it?" The hum persisted throughout the day, barely noticeable, yet undeniably there. It was like walking through a heartbeat, steady and kind. That evening, Harry returned once more to the common room. Hermione was already there, surrounded by open books and notes. "I did some research," she said without looking up. "There's a theory in Foundational Charms of Early Hogwarts about something called resonant spell echoes, ancient enchantments that awaken when harmony is restored between intent and magic." Harry raised an eyebrow. "Harmony?" She nodded eagerly. "Yes, if magic was ever cast with conflicting emotions, say, ambition versus compassion, it could fracture over time. But if someone later channels the original intent, the pure, gentle form, it can reawaken in its true state." He smiled softly. "So you're saying Hogwarts is healing itself?" Hermione met his gaze. "Maybe through you, through the ink." The thought filled the room with a quiet wonder neither could describe. Harry sat down, watching the firelight flicker across the runes of the inkpot. They glowed brighter now, steady, calm, and golden once more. He picked up his quill and whispered, "You're part of this, aren't you?" The ink rippled gently and wrote, "I am what remains when the lesson is remembered." Hermione's breath caught. "What lesson?" The ink hesitated, then appeared to sigh as it wrote, "That magic begins as listening." And at that, the faint hum through the castle deepened once, like a heartbeat of agreement, before softening again. The ink's glow dimmed to a peaceful stillness. The castle quieted, and in that hush, Harry, Hermione, and the magic that had slept for centuries shared the same breath of wonder, one that whispered of harmony restored. The enchanted inkpot, once forgotten, had awakened not to teach new spells, but to remind Hogwarts of its oldest truth, that magic was never about control, but connection. The next few days unfolded with a sense of gentle purpose, as though the castle itself was aware that something precious had been rediscovered. The hum that had once rippled faintly through the walls had quieted now, settling into a deeper stillness, like a song that had finished its verse but lingered in memory. Hermione, ever the scholar, had turned her curiosity into quiet research. She carried armfuls of ancient books from the library to the Gryffindor common room, her parchment filled with notes about magical artifacts of consciousness, enchanted ink, and forgotten founders' relics. Ron mostly watched with mild amusement, occasionally offering biscuits or unhelpful theories that made Hermione sigh. Harry, however, felt a quiet connection growing stronger each evening. The Inkpot had become something more than an artifact. It felt almost like a companion, a piece of Hogwarts itself that had decided to trust him. He had stopped thinking of it as it and began thinking of it as her, though he couldn't say why. That night, the three friends gathered by the fire. The room was peaceful, illuminated by soft orange light and the faint pop of wood burning. The castle outside was deep in slumber, snow still drifting beyond the windows. Hermione set her book aside, her expression thoughtful. "I think I've found something important," she said, her voice low. "There's mention of an enchanted ink created by Rowena Ravenclaw herself, a mixture of phoenix ash and the tears of moon lotus flowers. It was said to respond only to writers whose intent was pure and kind." Ron blinked. "Phoenix ash? That sounds expensive." Hermione gave him a patient look. "It's not about cost, Ron. It's symbolic. Phoenixes represent rebirth. The ink wasn't just meant to record knowledge. It was meant to renew it." Harry leaned forward. "Renew it?" "Yes," she said softly. "When written with empathy, it awakened spells that healed the castle itself. That's why the walls hummed. It was Hogwarts remembering harmony through your writing." He sat back, the realization dawning quietly. The Inkpot hadn't just been communicating with him, it had been repairing something. People stopped listening. "You woke it again because you wrote with understanding, not command." Ron stretched, stifling a yawn. "So what now? Do we just keep chatting with magical office supplies?" Harry chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe that's exactly what we should do." Hermione rolled her eyes but smiled. "I think Harry's right. There's more to this story. Rowena Ravenclaw's enchantments were never just for show. They were lessons, woven into magic itself. Maybe this ink still carries one we haven't learned yet." Harry's gaze drifted to the inkpot, resting serenely on the table. "Then let's ask." He reached for his quill, dipping it carefully into the ink. The runes glowed faintly, welcoming the motion. On a fresh page of parchment, Harry wrote slowly, deliberately, "What do you wish us to learn?" For a moment, there was nothing. The only sound was the soft hiss of the fire and the quiet flutter of pages from Hermione's open book. Then, the ink shimmered, and graceful script appeared beneath his question. "The heart that listens shapes the magic that follows. When wands are silent, words remain." Hermione leaned closer. "It's poetic and true," she murmured. Ron frowned. "So, we're supposed to write more?" Harry smiled gently. "I think that's exactly what it wants." He dipped his quill again. "If words remains, then what should we write?" The reply came swiftly this time. "Write what you love. The castle remembers kindness in every letter." Hermione's eyes softened, and even Ron grew quiet. There was a stillness in the room, one that felt almost sacred. Harry hesitated, then began to write. Not a spell, not a question, just simple words from his heart. "I love the first snow at Hogwarts. the smell of wood smoke and treacle tart, the way the castle lights shimmer on the lake at night. As his quill moved, the ink shimmered brighter, rippling softly across the page. Hermione added her own line beneath his. I love the library at dawn, the sound of turning pages and the quiet hum of thought. Ron sighed and, after a pause, scrawled his own line. Crooked, but sincere, I love dinner. Hermione snorted, but before she could say anything, the ink rippled once more. The words they had written began to glow faintly, and then, miraculously, lifted off the parchment like drifting ribbons of light. The glowing sentences twisted gently in the air, their letters transforming into soft shapes, snowflakes, books, plates of food, all shimmering with warmth and laughter. Ron's eyes widened. Blimey! Hermione smiled, her voice barely above a whisper. It's showing us memories. The magic is feeding on emotion, pure, gentle feelings. The glowing shapes drifted toward the walls, where they faded into the stone, leaving faint traces of light behind. For a heartbeat, the entire common room seemed to breathe. The fire burned brighter, the air grew warmer, and then, through the ceiling above them, came a faint, melodic hum, the sound of the castle sighing in contentment. Harry felt a deep calm settle inside him, a serenity he hadn't known since before the war. For the first time in years, the world felt utterly safe. It's healing, Hermione whispered, the castle's responding to emotion, our affection for it. Hogwarts has always been alive, Harry, but this is how it remembers it's loved. Harry nodded slowly, still watching the soft light fade into the walls. And all we had to do was write. The Inkpot's runes shimmered once more, brighter now than before. Its next words appeared like a lullaby. When hearts write together, the castle listens. Ron tilted his head, thoughtful. So if we wrote about things we didn't like Filch's stew, would it, I don't know, redecorate the kitchen? Hermione groaned. That's not how this works, Ron. Harry laughed quietly, shaking his head, though I wouldn't mind if it tried. Their laughter filled the common room, soft, honest, and echoing like sunlight against glass. After a moment, Hermione leaned back, her expression thoughtful again. You know, this isn't just an artifact. It's a message from the founders themselves. They built Hogwarts not just to teach magic, but to preserve emotion, to remind people that power without compassion fades. Harry nodded slowly. And maybe that's why it found us. Ron blinked. Us? Yeah, Harry said softly, glancing between them. We've fought for this castle. Protected it. Maybe it's letting us write its next story. Hermione's smile was warm, touched with pride. Then let's make it a good one. They stayed there late into the night, writing simple, beautiful things. Their favorite places, the friends they missed, the lessons they cherished. Every line they wrote glowed softly, drifting toward the walls until the entire common room pulsed faintly with golden light. When at last they set down their quills, the inkpot glowed one final time. Hogwarts remembers. And the castle itself, ancient, wise, and alive, seemed to hum in quiet agreement. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the grounds in silver calm. Inside, the fire dimmed to embers. The three friends sat together in the fading glow, content in the knowledge that, for once, their magic hadn't been about battles or darkness. It had been about remembrance, about writing warmth back into the heart of a place that had given them so much. And though they didn't know it yet, their words would remain, woven into the castle's living spell, echoing softly whenever Hogwarts dreamed. The following evening, a mist rolled over the castle grounds, wrapping Hogwarts in a soft veil of moonlight. The air felt charged, not in a fearful way, but with a kind of expectant calm, as though the ancient walls knew something was about to be revealed. The Enchanted Inkpot sat quietly on the table in the Gryffindor common room, the golden runes around its rim glowing with a faint, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat in perfect harmony with the castle itself. Hermione, ever the observer of detail, noticed it first. "It's brighter tonight," she whispered, brushing her fingers lightly against the inkpot's edge. The glow shimmered beneath her touch, rippling like liquid sunlight. Harry watched it closely. "It's almost like it's waiting." "Maybe," Hermione said softly. "It wants to show us something." Ron frowned, leaning forward. "Show us?" "It's ink, Hermione, not a portrait." Hermione smiled faintly. "After everything we've seen, Ron, can you really say that with a straight face?" He opened his mouth to reply, but stopped when the inkpot shimmered again, this time brighter, stronger, as if it had been listening to them all along. The fire in the hearth dimmed to a soft glow, the air thickening with the gentle hum they had grown used to. Harry reached for his quill, dipping it into the ink. "All right then," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "If you have something to show us, we're ready." He placed the quill to parchment. But before he could write a single word, the ink began to flow on its own. Thin, graceful lines spilled across the page, forming symbols, letters, and shapes that shimmered with silver blue light. Hermione gasped as the runes began to rearrange themselves, overlapping, swirling, and expanding until they formed a circular pattern that stretched across the entire sheet. It was a seal, a magical sigil of breathtaking intricacy, older than any enchantment they had ever seen. Its edges glowed with faint traces of blue and gold, and at its center, a single phrase appeared in clear, elegant writing. "The ink remembers the first word." Hermione inhaled sharply. "The first word," she murmured. "That's a reference from the Founder's texts." Rowena Ravenclaw believed that all magic began with a single word, a sound so pure that it gave shape to thought. Harry frowned thoughtfully. "And the ink, it's remembering that?" She nodded. "Yes, or trying to remind us of it." The parchment began to glow even brighter. Slowly, softly, new words appeared beneath the first. When the castle was young, its stones were bare and listening. The founders gathered here, not to build a school, but to weave a promise that wisdom, courage, kindness, and patience would never fade from the world, so long as one heart believed in them. Harry, Hermione, and Ron exchanged wide-eyed looks. "It's speaking of the founders themselves," Hermione whispered. This inkpot must have been used during the creation of that very spell, Hogwarts' foundational magic. Ron blinked. You mean this thing helped build Hogwarts? In a way, Hermione replied. It might have recorded the vow that bound the founders together. Their words became the castle's heart. Harry looked back at the glowing parchment. The symbols were shifting again, forming images now, 4 silhouettes standing together beneath an archway, the faint outline of Hogwarts rising around them. The ink wrote on, slow and deliberate. We built not a fortress, but a home, not a monument, but a memory. In this ink, our promise sleeps. Only when the castle forgets will it awaken to remind the kind-hearted. Harry's chest tightened with wonder. So that's why it woke up, he said softly. Because Hogwarts needed reminding. Because we needed reminding. The ink pulsed brighter, and another phrase appeared, shorter this time, but radiant. Magic is not power, it is remembrance. Hermione's eyes shone with tears she didn't bother to hide. That's what it's been trying to tell us all along, she whispered. All these centuries, wizards and witches have been trying to control magic, to master it. But the founders understood something deeper. Magic isn't meant to be mastered. It's meant to be remembered, cherished, and shared. Harry felt the truth of it resonate deep within him, stirring something old and gentle in his soul. He thought of all the spells he'd learned, all the battles he'd fought, and realized that the most powerful magic he had ever known hadn't come from incantations. It had come from friendship, from love, from choosing compassion when anger would have been easier. The light from the inkpot grew brighter still, spreading across the table and spilling softly onto the floor like liquid starlight. The warmth it gave off wasn't heat, it was comfort, the same warmth that had once filled Hogwarts when laughter echoed through its halls and students scribbled stories in their notebooks beside crackling fires. Ron spoke in a low, awed voice. It's beautiful. It's like the castle's alive again, Harry nodded slowly. It is alive. It always was. We just forgot how to listen. Hermione reached for the parchment and traced a finger along the glowing words. Listen, she whispered. It's still writing. New words appeared, calm and deliberate. You listened with care, and so the ink remembers once more. Hogwarts will keep this light within its walls. Whenever kindness is written in her halls, the castle will hum with life again. The glow deepened, and then the writing faded, leaving behind only faint silver markings, like the memory of moonlight on water. The inkpot's runes softened back to gold, steady and still. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The air felt full, not heavy, not tense, just full of meaning, of emotion, of quiet revelation. At last, Hermione whispered, "This was never about learning a spell. It was about remembering why we do magic in the first place." Harry nodded, and maybe it was waiting for us, for this generation, to remind Hogwarts of who she truly is. The fire popped softly, scattering tiny sparks. One ember landed near the parchment, flickering against the faint silver seal that still shimmered at its center. It didn't burn, it only glowed brighter for a heartbeat before fading into stillness. Hermione smiled, The Founder's legacy isn't just in the castle's stones, it's in how we treat one another. This ink, it's a memory of kindness. Ron grinned faintly. Well, I'll say this much. If that's the kind of magic Hogwarts has been keeping secret, I'm glad we stumbled on it. Beats getting eaten by a basilisk again. Harry laughed softly, the sound warm and genuine. Yeah, I think this kind of magic is one we could all use more of. The laughter faded into a comfortable quiet. The castle itself seemed to exhale, the torches along the walls flickering gently as if nodding in agreement. For a brief moment, the faint hum they had first heard days ago returned, stronger, clearer, more harmonious. The inkpot gave one last pulse of golden light, brighter than before. Then, upon the parchment, one final line appeared, simple and serene. The castle remembers love. So long as love remains, so shall magic. Harry leaned back, a soft smile on his lips. He looked at Hermione and Ron, the two people who had stood beside him through every trial, every darkness, every impossible storm, and he understood. This was the truth that all their adventures had been leading toward. Magic wasn't in wands or spells or power. It lived in every choice to be kind, to forgive, to care. Hermione closed the book in front of her with reverent care. The Enchanted Inkpot has done what it was meant to do, she said quietly. It's given Hogwarts its memory back. Ron nodded, still watching the parchment. And it's given us one too. Harry smiled. Yeah, he murmured, glancing toward the window where the moonlight pooled on the floor. It has. Outside, the night deepened into silver silence. The castle, alive once more with ancient memory and newfound warmth, seemed to glow faintly against the sky, and within its heart, the inkpot rested quietly, its runes dim now but content, having passed on the lesson it had guarded for centuries, that magic begins where kindness is written. Morning arrived gently, like a whispered promise of peace. The mist that had lingered through the night began to lift, revealing a Hogwarts bathed in soft winter light. Snow clung to the towers in quiet stillness, and the castle's ancient stones shimmered faintly under the early sun, as though some secret warmth pulsed deep within them. The Gryffindor common room was hushed, filled only with the tender crackle of the fire and the faint rustle of pages turning. Hermione sat curled in her favorite chair, her curls falling around her face as she wrote in her journal. Across from her, Ron lounged on the sofa, half asleep, his head tipped back and a faint smile on his lips. And at the window, watching the light spill over the grounds, stood Harry, calm, thoughtful, and quietly full of wonder. The Enchanted Inkpot rested on the table beside him. Its golden runes were dim now, glowing only faintly, as though content to fade back into stillness after its long vigil. For the first time since it had awakened, it looked ordinary, yet in its silence there was a serenity that felt deeply alive. Hermione closed her journal softly and looked up. "It hasn't spoken since last night, has it?" she asked. Harry shook his head with a small smile. "No, I think it's finished what it came here to do." Ron stretched and yawned, opening one sleepy eye. "Good. Maybe now we can stop staying up till 3, talking to school supplies. Hermione threw him a mock glare, though her eyes sparkled. You'll thank it one day, Ron. That inkpot has reminded Hogwarts and us of something truly important. Ron grinned. Oh, I know. Kindness, magic, love. Got it. I'm just saying, if it ever starts talking again, I'm pretending I'm asleep. Harry laughed quietly, shaking his head. You know, he said, I don't think it needs to talk anymore. I think it's part of the castle again, part of the magic that's always been here. Hermione nodded, her voice soft. You're right. The founders built this place to last not because of power, but because of purpose. The ink was just their memory, waiting for someone who'd understand. Harry turned toward the fire, watching the golden glow dance across the stone walls, and now it remembers again. You can feel it, can't you? The castle feels lighter. Ron blinked, rubbing his eyes. You mean that humming sound? Yes, Harry said with a small smile. It's quieter now, but it's still there, like a heartbeat, like it's breathing again. Hermione rose from her chair and joined him by the window. Together, they looked out over the snow-covered courtyard, where sunlight caught in delicate arcs across the frost. Students were beginning to stir below, small figures moving between the glistening arches, laughter rising faintly through the crisp air. It's beautiful, she murmured. Hogwarts has always been beautiful, but today it feels more alive. Harry's gaze softened. Maybe that's what happens when you remind magic what it's made of. For a long, peaceful moment, the three of them stood there in comfortable silence. The warmth of the fire blended with the cool light from the window, creating a perfect balance, warmth and clarity, stillness and life. Then, with a quiet motion, Harry picked up the inkpot. He studied it for a moment, its small glass body, the faint glimmer of runes, the way it seemed to hum softly in his hand, and then set it back down on the table, exactly where it had first awakened. I think it should stay here, he said softly. This is where it belongs. Maybe one day someone else will find it, someone who needs to be reminded. Hermione smiled warmly, and when they do, it'll be ready. Just as it was for you, Ron nodded sleepily. Let's hope it waits another few centuries. We've earned a bit of quiet, haven't we? Harry chuckled and looked around the common room, the firelight flickering against portraits, the gentle hum of magic settling into stillness once more. He felt something deep within him ease, the kind of peace that comes after understanding, after listening. The inkpot glowed once more, a soft golden pulse, and then dimmed completely, becoming still. The three friends watched in silence. Hermione whispered, "Good night, old friend." And for just a heartbeat, the faintest shimmer rippled across the ink's surface, like a smile in reply. Outside, the morning sun rose higher, spilling gold across the snow. The castle stood serene and timeless, its walls alive with memory. In its quiet heart, Hogwarts carried the echo of every word written in kindness, from the founders' vows to the laughter of three friends by the fire. The enchanted inkpot had finished its story, and in doing so, it had reminded the castle and everyone within it that true magic was never about spells at all. It was about warmth, remembrance, and love that listened. As the day drew to a quiet close, The golden light of sunset slipped softly through the tall windows of Gryffindor Tower. The castle glowed like a living dream, peaceful, timeless, and safe. The laughter of students drifted faintly through the corridors, mingling with the warm hum of the fires and the distant hoot of an owl returning from flight. Harry sat by the window, gazing out across the snow-dusted grounds. Beyond the lake, the forbidden forest shimmered in pale twilight, its trees whispering in the wind. Somewhere deep inside the castle, a clock chimed softly, its sound rolling gently through the halls like a lullaby. Hermione had fallen asleep in her chair, a book still resting against her chest. Ron snored softly on the sofa, his head tilted back, one hand hanging loosely over the edge. The fire burned low, its embers glowing faint and red, like the heartbeat of the room itself. Harry smiled. There was no need for words anymore. The castle had found its voice again, not through noise or spells, but through quiet remembrance. The hum that had once filled the air now lived in every stone, every shadow, every flicker of light. Hogwarts was alive and at peace. He looked over to the inkpot one last time. It sat motionless on the table, perfectly still, its golden runes now faint and resting. But somehow, Harry could feel its contentment, a gentle awareness, as if it too were drifting into sleep after a long, long vigil. He reached out, lightly touching its rim. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "for reminding us what magic really means." Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and slow, each flake catching the last rays of sunset before settling into the world below. It was the kind of snow that muffled every sound, wrapping the castle in peaceful silence. Harry leaned back against the window frame, closing his eyes. The warmth of the fire and the cool of the glass met in perfect balance. In that stillness, the castle seemed to sigh, a sound like comfort, like rest. And as the night deepened, Hogwarts dreamed again, not of battles or triumphs, but of kindness, laughter, and the gentle glow of words written with love. The magic of remembrance lived on, and somewhere beneath the stars, the castle whispered back, "Sleep well, dear one. You are home."